Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thanks for stopping by. Just to remind you, we've got all our sessions for this year from Mindspeak uploaded now under Rich TV. That's Christine Lagarde and Dr. Mike Cooney. I've also uploaded some snippets from an interview I did a few months ago with Charles Ireland of EABL. He'll be our next guest at Mindspeak. And if you care to have a look at that, it's quite interesting. And of course, that interview I did about a week ago with MG Vasanji is also loaded, and you can link up to it from Rich Wrap-Ups. My home thoughts return to the Fairmont Mount Kenya, those extraordinary drummers who had the groove, and you can see it from the momentum in the photograph. I'm reading Graham Greene's The Comedians at the moment and enjoying it thoroughly, actually. I haven't read Graham Greene for so long. And just one quote: "There is a point of no return, unremarked at the time in most lives." I went through the James R. Clapper transcript about sub-Saharan Africa, and the link again is on the website as well. Just to pull out a few comments: sub-Saharan Africa will almost certainly see political and related security turmoil in 2014. Continent has become a hothouse for the emergence of extremist and rebel groups, which increasingly launch deadly asymmetric attacks, and which government forces often cannot effectively counter due to a lack of capability, and sometimes will. And I think that's completely correct. The asymmetric risk in Africa remains very potent. Additionally, a youth bulge will grow with unfulfilled economic expectations and political frustrations. And I think that's another important point, because we've got this enormous demographic bulge, but these guys, their expectations are very high, and I think if they're not met, increasingly we'll see stress levels rise. And I saw that in some of the data that came out of the World Economic Forum and the Mohammed Ibrahim Index, where in-country security had deteriorated substantially. It was one of the few indicators that had deteriorated, and I think it's signaling exactly this point he's making. In Somalia, Al-Shabaab is conducting asymmetric attacks against government facilities and Western targets in and around Mogadishu. The credibility and effectiveness of the young Somali government will be further threatened by persistent political infighting, weak leadership from President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, ill-equipped government institutions, and pervasive technical, political, and administrative shortfalls. I think he's on the money there as well. Coming to East Africa, security has increased, and ongoing counter-terrorism and policing partnerships with Western nations have strengthened in the wake of the September 2013 attack by Al-Shabaab affiliated extremists at the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi. Nevertheless, East African governments will have difficulty protecting the wide range of potential targets. Al-Shabaab associated networks might be planning additional attacks in Kenya and throughout East Africa, including in Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Uganda, to punish those countries that deploy troops to Somalia in support of its government. He's got some good analysis on South Sudan and Sudan, and I agree with him on South Sudan completely. I think there has been a material breakdown there, and I don't think it's going to be that easy to patch together. He's analysed Nigeria, the Central African Republic, the DRC as well, and Joseph Kony. It's well worth having a look at. It's under Rich Wrap-Ups. I'll put up a photograph of him. Returning to Robert D. Kaplan's Monsoon, the Indian Ocean and the Future of American Power, that I read over the weekend, on page 40, he writes, "One Western expert of the Arab world said that in private audiences, the Sultan, a Sandhurst graduate, is the best informed, most thoughtful, most well-read and articulate leader in both Arabic and English. In the Middle East, he is the only one in the region you can truly call a Renaissance man." I'll put up a photograph of him taken in February 1975. And most well-informed accounts indicate that it was the Sultan, Qaboos bin Said, who turned out to be the trusted interlocutor between the two Husseins, Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani, and that rapprochement, which I thought was interesting. Of course, I wrote that piece on the 28th of October, Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani, the two Husseins in a US-Iran rapprochement. And then I came across this photograph. I just typed in Oman, beautiful swimming pool and the palm trees, and I couldn't resist it. Really looked attractive. Going back to Kaplan, I listened to a video yesterday at 35 minutes and 49 seconds. He says this: in 10 years, the US will have a closer relationship with Tehran than Riyadh. I think that's the existential threat that the Saudi Arabians are chafing against at the moment. That's a legitimate theory, I think. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the Indian Ocean just off Diani. Kissinger says Asia is like 19th century Europe on use of force. Former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger raised the specter of war in Asia as tension between China and Japan played out at a global security conference. Asia is more in a position of 19th century Europe, where military conflict is not ruled out, Kissinger said. Between Japan and China, the issue for the rest of us is that neither side be tempted to rely on force to settle the issue. Fu Ying, chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of China's National People's Party Congress, told the conference earlier that China's relationship with Japan is probably at its worst. China will take action to maintain stability in the region, she said. Fu said the government in Beijing would respond effectively to any provocation that risked upsetting the order of tranquility in East Asia. Many people are worried, Fu told the panel. The bilateral relations, the cooperation is suffering a lot. Clearly that remains, I think, the geopolitical hotspot this year. James Hothmai, who's the Army Chief of Staff in South Sudan, said, I spent all my life in guerrilla wars to achieve independence. I'm not happy seeing people of South Sudan suffering, which is what I see. The politicians don't see it. Rather damning, I thought. Global defense spending to grow after years of decline. Russia is projected to increase defense spending by more than 44% in the next 3 years, and that will push the UK into 4th place. US remained the top spender last year, $582.4 billion, followed by China, $139.2 billion. Russia spent $68.9 billion. Saying no region has seen a faster surge in defense spending than the Middle East, where Oman and Saudi Arabia have increased their military budgets by more than 30% in the last 2 years. Saudi Arabia's budget has tripled in 10 years. I like this photograph of the view from the stands at the Super Bowl. I found it on Photo Booth. And then a very interesting essay in Africa Report, China, Africa. The dragon deal maker has Africa dazzled and dizzy. In May last year, China's President Xi Jinping announced during a visit to Tanzania that the great Asian power shall be providing $20 billion in credit lines to Africa over the next 3 years. The announcement, some observers opined, may have prompted United States President Obama's $7 billion pledge a few weeks after to expand Africa's energy infrastructure. Predictably, the pundits and the newswires went hysterical with analysis. After nearly a decade, the $8 billion pledge to modernize Nigeria's railways is now only showing signs of materialization. The usual cliches, no strings attached, aid and fierce Sino-Western competition over the Africa prize were unleashed with characteristic repetitiveness. No one remarked that exactly the same pledge had been made in Beijing the year before, at the summer meeting of African heads of state and their Chinese counterparts, or that the $20 billion figure first surfaced in the Chinese government announcement in 2007. It gets more curious when one realizes that the $20 billion sum is dwarfed by the money that often gets bandied about when African presidents make their way one by one to Beijing. In 2008, China pledged $9 billion to the DRC for access to the latter's huge mineral reserves. In 2010, Ghana's then President Atta Mills signed credit framework agreements with pledges totaling $13 billion. In the same year, China pledged the exact amount to Mozambique for investments in tourism, mining and energy. In 2013, China pledged $5 billion to Kenya. It is immediately clear that the math does not add up. And if the Chinese are good at anything, they sure are good at math. So what is going on here? Well worth a read. Very interesting indeed. Coming to the currency markets, Euro 135.07, dollar index 81.16 when I looked last. Yen, when I checked earlier this morning, 101.31, but I saw sharply it rallied again below 101 just before I went to do this podcast. It touched 100.78 yesterday, which was the strongest level since November the 21st. The Swiss franc 0.9034. Pound 162.92, it's been on a losing streak of late. Aussie sharp move high up to 0.8892. The Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Glenn Stevens said beyond the short term, growth is expected to strengthen, helped by continued low interest rates and the lower exchange rate. India rupee 62.735, it's lost 1.5% this year. South Korean won 1084. But touched 1090, or just below 1090, which was the weakest level since September 11. The Real 244 depreciated 1.1% yesterday, and closed at the weakest level since August 21st, and it was down 2.1% in January. The Egyptian pound 696, and the Rand 1122.21. So far this year, Argentina's peso has dropped 19%, South Africa's Rand 7%, and Turkey's lira 6%. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, and it would be higher but for the recent strength of the yen. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I'm still running that trade, though I think the inflation numbers are a shot across my bow for sure. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, and that really has rebounded very sharply in 2014. However, a 52% jump in Japan's monetary base in January was the biggest on record after a 53% climb in November. The balance stood at the equivalent of $1.98 trillion, which the central bank plans to increase by about 30% by the end of this year. I'm going to put up a chart of the Nikkei over 3 months. It fell, when I would check this morning, it was down sharply. At the end of January 2013, Japanese stocks were second only to Portugal for the biggest rally anywhere in developed markets. However, this year it's leading declines. It's down more than 10% since the DEC 30 peak. And I'll also put up a chart so you can see the Nikkei, the S&P, and the Dow, and you'll see also that that weakness has not been unique to the yen, although it's been leading. But most of the developed market equities have taken fright. Emerging markets, of course, much more dramatic. Coming to the commodity markets, gold, I'll put up a 1-year chart, 1256.635. I think it's gotten congested here, but of course, each time you think it's congested, some bad news breaks and people go into gold. I think crude oil is expensive at $96.52. Notwithstanding the fact that it fell $1.06 yesterday and closed at the lowest level since January 27, prices are down 1.8% this year. I think structurally we're going to have a lower oil price. I think in part because of Iranian supply. I look to sell it around $100, frankly. Copper declined yesterday, and that was the longest losing streak since January 1996. I'll put up a 1-year chart and you can see for yourself. Coffee futures staged their biggest rally in 8 years Monday, amid worries that abnormally dry weather in Brazil would hurt the country's crop. I'll put up a 1-year chart of coffee and you can see this sharp spike higher. Coming to emerging markets, Bloomberg's customized index tracking 20 emerging market currencies fell to the lowest since 2009 after declining 3% in January, and Bloomberg's Latin America currency index slid 1% to a decade low today. President Zuma says Eastern and Southern Africa is moving toward a free trade area. 26 Eastern and Southern African nations are making progress towards agreeing on a free trade area that will create a market with nearly 600 million people and a combined GDP of $1 trillion. This market scale could launch a sizable part of the continent onto a new developmental trajectory, he said. The free trade area will form the basis for an Africa-wide free trade agreement, which could create a single market of $2.6 trillion and a population of over 1 billion. IMF expects SSA's economy to grow 6.1% this year. There remains ongoing uncertainty, this is Zuma, in the global economy, with the Eurozone in particular continuing to struggle. Africa's rise over the past decade has been very real. The size of the African economy has more than tripled since 2000. This growth is predicted to continue in the foreseeable future, giving rise to a new Africa paradigm. Africa is the new growth frontier. And then saying he's talking about intra-African investing. Intra-African investment should define the new Africa paradigm, he says. Inflows to Africa rose by 6.8% to an estimated $56.3 billion due to the strong performance of Southern Africa, including South Africa and Mozambique in particular, South Africa experienced record levels of $10 billion, Mozambique $7 billion. And I wrote about this Maputo boomtown on the 4th of June 2012. It's all about the gas reserves. I'll put up a photograph of Maputo taken from the sea, and I asked at that time, is it a mirage or is it Maputo? 610 days ago. The South African all-share is down 2.73% in 2014, of course taking its cue from the developed markets. Dollar versus rand, I'm going to put up a 1-month chart. You know, I think there's a chance we're going to trade 12 this year. Egyptian pound is trading at 6.96, and interestingly, a Reuters report has come out saying that the unofficial rate is at 7.35, and that spread actually is very, very narrow, and I think it speaks to an extraordinary outcome in Egypt, or the scale of the support emanating out of its friends like Saudi Arabia. Egyptian stock market, of course, has had a tear this year, up 9.29% as of May 2010 highs. The Nigerian all-share had a strong session yesterday, has climbed back into positive territory, plus 0.09%. Ghana Stock Exchange plus 8.04% and surged yesterday to a fresh lifetime high. The DRC's economy grew by 8.5% last year and could achieve double-digit growth in 2014, helped by relative calm in the mineral-rich East, the Prime Minister said yesterday. We can today predict growth in double figures for 2014. Augustine Matata Ponyo, apparently the IMF predicted growth of 10.5% in 2014 for Congo. Ponyo said that Congo had no immediate plans to resume talks with the IMF over a program of more than $200 million in loans, suspended in late 2012 after authorities failed to abide by a request to publish mining contracts. He assured investors that the country retained close ties with the IMF. He said IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde congratulated Congo for its exceptional economic performance, he said. I wonder if she did. And then I like this sentence from the Africa Confidential. At the current rate of progress, Addis Ababa will get its new railway long before the AU gets its army and extra money. This is all about the AU standby force. I don't think that's really going to happen. UK brand Forever 21 is to open its first store on the African continent, apparently in Cape Town, and I know about it because the girls are always pottering around on it. And then I came across this photograph by David Goulden, a leopard patiently waiting in a tree on the Telegraph, and it reminded me of the Samburu 838 days ago when we saw the leopard in a tree, and it was sort of obviously munched on this impala's ears, as you can see from the photograph that's going to be put up. Gazprom has held meetings with Tanzanian officials and is studying the possibility of tapping offshore and onshore natural gas in the East African country the Russian gas producers said this is rig zone. Various estimates have Tanzania holding 43 trillion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas. Some folks are estimating that could be 200 trillion cubic feet. And I said previously, I'm also certain that the eastern seaboard of Africa, from Mozambique up through Somalia, is the last great energy prize in the 21st century. And that's evidence of that. Yum, who of course own Kentucky Fried Chicken, issued their earnings, and I looked through that report for the Africa piece. Plus 6% quarter on quarter into quarter four, and full year Africa up 14%. And 884 days ago, the girls dragged me to Kentucky Fried Chicken in Nairobi. It had just opened in the Junction Mall. And I took a photograph and I tweeted, the biggest gig in Nairobi is Colonel Sanders. I think that speaks to that story about Yum's growth. And I also wrote about it in September 2011 when I was saying, Kentucky Fried Chicken makes the bull case for Africa. Interesting report also on BD Live about Tills still ring for fast food. TGI Fridays is hawking franchise opportunities throughout South Africa. Burger King is set to open its first 3 stores in the country's economic hub, Gauteng, saying it's sort of a holy grail right now. Coming to Kenya, violent protests in a mosque after police raid. There's a video link by Reuters. And that's on Rich Wrap-Ups, and then a radio interview by Radio France International, where the fellow they interview says that 6 Kenyans have died in these 2 days of clashes. Police have fired tear gas and rubber bullets yesterday at protesters who are hurling rocks and shouting, "Release our brothers," in reference to more than 100 people the police arrested after violent clashes in the same area. Then on a report on the BBC, I saw that they'd hoisted an Al-Shabaab or Al-Qaeda flag had been raised at the mosque, and I'll put up that photograph. And I think that was probably the last straw for some of the police, and probably was the catalyst for the response we've had. But bear in mind that it's highly unusual for the police to go into a mosque. And I think a lot of the fellows down there are pretty upset about it. I appreciate there's a lot of extremism down there, but I'm not sure that we've got the right tactics to deal with it. Kenya police believe that 4 men are part of a vast terrorist network in the country and plan to execute to attack government buildings and foreign establishments. This is apparently Reuters got a citing of some court papers. It was that vast terrorist network which caught me. I'm going to put up a photograph of Mombasa, and you can see the fellow, the barbecuing the corn of the cob and the cassava, which is what you go to Mombasa, the seafront, to have. And I'll also put up that photograph of the sunset in Mombasa, which I like. Delays by the Treasury to pay state contractors' bills increased the value of non-performing commercial bank loans by 30.9% last year, according to the Business Daily. Central Bank of Kenya sector report for 2013 shows bank loans amounting to 80.6 billion shillings, nearly $1 billion, had gone for more than 3 months without being serviced as of December last year, up from 61.6 billion a year earlier. Pre-tax profit for the banks rose quite substantially, and I think we've got to keep an eye on that. Auto Express eyes EAC growth after Axtis buys 36%. That's interesting. There are so many cars on the road, all second-hand, all needing maintenance. Kenya shilling 86.704. The Nairobi All shares down 1.51% so far this year. Could not snap a 6-session losing streak yesterday, but eased just 0.05%, and therefore, on balance, I think we're going to break that losing streak today. The Nairobi All share rallied 5.795% the start of the year through January 24th, when it closed at an all-time high. Subsequent gains since the 24th through this morning in over 6 sessions has fallen 6.91%. Thursday last week and Friday were particularly brutal. The NSE 20 is down 2% in 2014. I think the market's turned higher today. Kenol Kobel apparently suffered a financial setback after the Court of Appeal blocked a 5 billion shilling award it had won against the Kenya Pipeline Company. The share price is down 10% this year. It was down 25% last year. As I said, I think the market is set to turn higher today. Agricultural stocks have literally flown out of the blocks. Not difficult to know why. The Rio Vipinga was the price catalyst for that, as everybody worked out the value of these companies was a multiple of the share price. Captoria plus 21.6% this year. EGAD's plus 23.15%. Bear in mind, it's the only coffee pure play. Coffee prices ran up very sharply yesterday. Safaricom bounced 1.81% yesterday. It had marched up to a record high of 12.45 on Jan 24th, fallen to close over 6 sessions to close just above the level it started the year at, and then bounced. Diamond Trust has seen very heavy trading action of late. I caught up with Nassim over the weekend. In fact, closed plus 2.33%. But it's doing a rights issue, but it's not that big a rights issue. It seems to be in the equation of for every 10 shares you hold, you can apply for one, which is hardly huge. And then TransCentury put out a pretty enigmatic announcement about RVR, and you can't tell from the announcement whether they're going to exercise a put or a call, but I think on balance, they're surely going to be exercising a put. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Come by and listen to my ruminations. I must say, I am grateful. Someone does.